my own interaction and experience of Rome has been a hugely positive one. I've DJ'd in Rome. I counted it up there. I've DJ'd, I think, 7 times in Rome previously since 2012. I think it was the first time I played there. It was in an old art space that was previously a garage, some sort of warehouse. I don't want to try and pronounce the name of that venue, but that was the first time I was there, and each and every time has been hugely enjoyable. One thing I have noticed about Rome, though, and I guess we almost see ourselves in the mirror when it comes to Dublin, is the quality of nightlife has deteriorated over the last decade, for some similar reasons, but also because there has not been enough of a hands-on approach or love shown for nightlife and nighttime culture by authorities. And that was, I guess, the main impetus for why we set up a group in Ireland, and it's called Give Us the Night. And our main aim, our main task, at least in the early days, was to change licensing laws. We wanted to extend the times that venues can open till at night. So in Ireland, we have the most restrictive licensing laws in all of Europe. Venues can close from anywhere between 2 a.m. to 3 a.m., you know, and for a lot of people, and particularly when we're talking about other countries like Germany or Holland, I mean, nightlife sometimes is only restarting around that time, or certainly at midnight. So in Ireland, nightlife is always very much catered towards pubs, and our pub culture is world renowned. We're well known as a nation of drinkers. I got to say, from living in Ireland and seeing the data and seeing how young people now engage with nightlife and alcohol, all the signs are there that alcohol consumption is actually down. The relationship with alcohol has changed a lot in the last 20 years. But what we've been trying to change, I guess, is the perception and the negative association that people have with nightlife, and to express to them in the strongest terms that this is about culture, this is about entertainment, this is about livelihoods, careers, this is about our cultural journey. And another similarity that we've noticed a lot, that I've noticed personally, between a country like Ireland and Italy, is that many of our greatest talents all leave the country. They get it, they reach a point where they just can't take things any further, you know, and that's been that's something that saddened me a lot over the years, that some of the greatest talents, the most creative people that I've known just haven't seen Ireland as a place to base themselves, don't see a future for themselves here. And a lot of the people who I meet in other cities, like Berlin, for instance, and I'll use a couple of examples, like maybe Max Durante or Freddie K. I mean, these people are household names in the global techno scene. Yes, they had to leave Rome to reach the potential of where they should be at. You know, we've always had a tradition of that in Ireland, where artists have to leave, but at the same time, and I think I'd imagine there's a lot of people in Rome that feel the same way, is that you would like to develop something here locally, for local creative people and performers and promoters and club operators of the future to be able to plug into, that they can be proud of, in the way that we, you know, Berlin or Amsterdam or any of these locations are. I've got to make a point as well. Ireland, we have come to the conclusion that with Ireland, although it's taken a long time to change our licensing laws, we do tell people as well, you know, every location is different. Dublin is different to Cork, for instance. They're cities, but at the same time, what they want in Cork is going to be different to what we want here in Dublin. Dublin is probably going to be the max in terms of what our nightlife experience will be in terms of closing times. And even at what that maximum is, it'll probably be something like 6 a.m. closing. There is a reform on the way. Finally, the government started to listen to us, and a few years ago, they started to develop policies with our guidance after reading our proposals. And then we were invited to join the Nighttime Economy Task Force, which I've been a member, and one of the other members of our group have been on for almost 2 years now. So just to explain who Give Us the Night are, we're an independent volunteer group. Initially, it was made up of promoters, performers, staff, clubs, journalists, club operators, journalists, bookers, just people that like going out at night. At the beginning, probably our group was quite big, but it's a little bit smaller now. And I find sometimes with advocacy groups, that can sometimes make a little bit more sense in terms of the day-to-day operation. But our community has only grown, and we're now kind of spokespeople really for nightlife. We're the definitive voice when it comes to nightlife, and nightlife matters, you know. And we're doing this voluntarily. We're doing it out of love. We want to build nightlife back up again. I'm not sure what the statistics are in Italy at the moment, but in Ireland we had over 500 nightclubs 20 years ago. Now we have 522 actually was the exact number. We now have 85, you know. And a point which I make to a lot of people is electronic music, which is closely connected to club culture. Electronic music now accounts for the highest output of recorded music coming from our country, and I think most countries around the world. I would say the same applies for Italy as well. Well, we're seeing more and more now as the previous types of cultural spaces, whether that was theatres, whether that was alternative art spaces, whether that was cultural institutions, they're not galleries, etc., exhibition spaces. Let's take alternative spaces out of there actually, but let's just say galleries, theatres, some of the other cultural institutions and cultural buildings. That between that demographic of 18 to 40, let's say, they are not engaging with these buildings anymore, you know, and more younger people are looking now for spaces for culture to exist and for nightlife to exist, and we're losing these spaces. And I think something that we suffer from in Ireland, and I'd say it could be similar in I think it's similar in Rome. First of all, you have, you know, a famous cultural history, you know, buildings, heritage, world famous, you know, world renowned. We in our own way also have some, you know, when it comes to literature and our famous poets and writers of the past. And we're very proud of that also, of our cultural history and heritage. But what we find in Dublin is a lot of people, particularly tourists and also us, we treat the city as almost as a museum, you know. So we value our cultural past, but we don't support and value present culture and communities that are growing right now and doing what we have to do to support them. So where we were at today and the kind of progress we've made, a few years back, we made it very clear to our community and to the governments that we want our culture to be recognized, that this is culture. Electronic music is contemporary culture. It has the eyes, ears, and numbers that can bring activity and vibrancy and excitement to urban centres and to other locations all around the country. And today, I think, is almost symbolic of the progress we've made. We had our first in-person meeting with the Nighttime Economy Task Force, and it was in Arts Council buildings, you know. So we're now liaising with lots of government agencies. We will be in regular contact with the government, city councils, etc. But that's kind of a background. I don't want to bore you too much with all of that either. But in terms of, like, we know Mirick, we know Lutz. I mean, Mirick visited Dublin, I think, back in 2018. And at that point, we hadn't really liaised properly with the council. So even when I meet Mirick, or when I'm in a meeting or I'm watching him talk, it kind of reminds me of the amount of progress we've made in the last few years. And certainly people like Mirick and Lutz are pioneers in this field and have really laid the foundation and have put together a lot of groundwork in terms of where nightlife kind of goes next and where it can go. So in terms of where we're at now, a report was published, which we were involved in within the task force, but we helped with that report, and that was published in the last quarter of 2021. And at this stage now, we are essentially ticking off actions from that. So licensing reform is the first one. Planning is obviously a big one now as well. We are suffering from an accommodation crisis at the moment. It's a housing crisis. It's a rental crisis. So space is at a premium. It's a familiar story around Europe at the moment and in other countries. But the problem is particularly bad in Dublin at the moment, as an example. And as a result, culture has been edged out. In the past, culture and nighttime venues and art spaces were moved out of suburbs, particularly nighttime venues. It disappeared from rural areas as well. Now it's been moved out of urban centres. So the question we've been putting to councils and to the government is, if we are being displaced, if you're moving us out of the city because you've got better better ideas for the space or the lands that can bring in more money and more revenue, you believe, then please find another location for us to move to. Designate, new areas for nightlife. Be a little bit more flexible in terms of how you change the use of buildings. So we're in an interesting position now, is that we're about to reform the licensing laws. It's taken many years, but similarly, we need the planning policies and planning laws to speak to those licensing laws as well. So, it's quite interesting, I guess. At the beginning, we started only focusing on licensing. Yeah, sorry, go on. Did you say something?
Yeah, no, please finish the sentence. Go ahead, sorry.
So licensing and planning are kind of the main ones for us, but also announced this week was that, now we've known about this for some time, but there are going to be 6 pilot programs around the country, which will include the appointment of 6 nighttime advisors. So that's something that we've pushed for some time, but I think Mirek touched on this earlier as well. One thing, having a nighttime mayor or a nighttime advisor, and I asked some of the, one of the relevant officials today in our meeting is, when they go and recruit and look for those individuals to come and work for them within the local authorities, what we'd like to know is whatever about the person who goes to work for and take up those roles, what is the commitment from the council? Because really we need a solid commitment from councils. You can't expect an individual to come in and just fix everything. We really need these nighttime advisors to be able to be creative. We're essentially trying to move the weeds out of their way, so that when that role does become available, that whoever can go in there can do something really special, and I think collaboration is key here. Some of the people who we almost saw as our, adversaries, or, I wouldn't kind of say enemies as such, but adversaries are, what would be the best way of putting it? They weren't people who we necessarily thought were on our side, but now we have learned to work with them with a shared and common goal. At times, we don't always see.
That's a really good point, Sunil. Yeah.
On everything, but I just lastly, I'm just going to scan through this very quickly, okay? During this process, obviously I was talking about access to space there. There is talk around cultural, government and council-owned cultural buildings and heritage sites and famous heritage buildings in certain areas that could be given up for cultural use, including nighttime use soon. And that's a conversation that's now open, which is very positive for us. But, to just go down through some of the stuff that Mirek was talking about earlier as well: transport, policing, noise control, non-alcoholic related events, transport. There's been an open discussion, obviously, with retail operators, whether that's in shopping centres or retail districts. We've been talking about night markets. We've been talking about health and safety. That should also focus on club safety in relation to alcohol and drugs. And I think it's very important to have an open conversation about this stuff as well.